debate, and I call Blake Stephenson to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Are we waiting for Government Minister, perhaps? Or?
No, you can get far away, far away.
I beg to move that this House has considered the performance of Thameslink services. So many of my constituents in mid-Bedfordshire rely on Thameslink services on the Bedford line to get to work or to get into London for leisure. Around 1.5 million passengers use Harlington and Flitwick stations in my constituency each year to meet friends, go shopping and take advantage of everything our capital has to offer. Commuters from Flitwick or Harlington station might also take advantage of the convenient connection that Thameslink offers them to our local airport in Luton, or perhaps utilise the Thameslink direct connections to Gatwick Airport slightly further afield. I know, because I've spent much of my career commuting to work on Thameslink services, that many constituents in the eastern part of mid-Bedfordshire also rely on services from the Arlesey and Hitchin stations on the East Coast Main Line in the constituency of my honourable friend and predecessor, the member for Hitchin. And many others will use Thameslink services. From stations including Bedford, Leagrave and Luton. I'll give way to the honourable member.
The honourable member and for the important debate he secured today. Just like him, I've been a regular user of services both in his constituency and mine from Thameslink, and just like so many of my constituents, I've been consistently let down by them. Their two most common bugbears are the lack of drivers to ensure that they can consistently be putting on the services they're advertising, which should seem the bare minimum, and the fact that when those services do go wrong, their way home, their route home, those emergency routes from taxis, from buses, which is so important in remote communities like ours, feel like an afterthought. Would he agree with me that making sure adequate drivers are secured for the line and making sure we get back to putting passengers at the heart of our rail operations is going to be fundamental to delivering rail services my community and his desperately need?
Blake Stephenson.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and I thank him for joining this debate, which is an important one for communities across Bedfordshire who rely so heavily on the railway services for leisure, but also for work. And the disruption is also having a huge impact on our economy, which I'll come on to later in the speech. In this, very briefly, because it's only a half-an-hour debate, but I thank you.
Can I first of all commend the honourable gentleman? Looking at his background, the work he's done in this, he's been very much to the fore in presenting the issue for those who, disabled people who use trains on a regular basis. He's done that, and I just want to say to Christopher that it's something that should be happening everywhere in this great United Kingdom. But does the honourable gentleman agree with me that disabled people, those who are in wheelchairs, those who have mobility issues, vision issues, that they deserve the same quality of service no matter where they are in this United Kingdom?
Blake Stephenson.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I couldn't agree more. And I will make reference in my speech to a need for free step access to Harlington and Flitwick stations. And I know that that's something that is necessary right across the country for the reasons the honourable gentleman has made. In this debate, I will focus in particular on these Thameslink services on the Bedford line and the East Coast Main Line, which my constituents use on a regular basis. As I say, Mr Chairman, since I first moved to mid-Bedfordshire more than a decade ago, I've been a regular user of the Thameslink. But it feels to me and to many of the constituents that I speak to about Thameslink that something has gone wrong. Too often, overcrowded, standing room-only carriages have become the norm. Too often, the timetable is merely a guideline and not a rule book for when trains will arrive. And we pay more and more each year for services which deliver less and less. A season ticket from Flitwick into Farringdon at about £5,500 per year. When I was drawn for this debate, I launched a local survey of residents to hear their experiences of travel on Thameslink. 57% of respondents told me that they thought the service was poor. 80% told me that they had been impacted by a cancellation in the past month, and 88% told me that they had experienced a delay of more than 10 minutes. These are not healthy statistics. I wanted to share some of the things that people in mid-Bedfordshire told me about the impact that the poor service is having on them. Callum from Flitwick told me trains are subject to delays or cancellations at very short notice. On one occasion, I was on the platform and the train was cancelled with only 1 or 2 minutes notice before it was due to arrive, even though Thameslink must have known that it hadn't left the previous station, Bedford, at least 10 minutes before it was due to arrive at Flitwick. Tracy from Haynes would happily use the train from Flitwick to Gatwick, but it's too unreliable. They have to use the car instead. Kate told me that despite travelling just once or twice a week, She's had to make 5 delay repay claims in the past month. Stephanie from Flitwick told me, "This train service is appalling. We very nearly missed our Eurostar despite leaving hours to spare. It's got to the stage that we dread using the service and are always worried about being stranded in London." And Jeanette from Malden noted that Flitwick is often cancelled as our return stop from London where there have been delays. This is usually only advised once we're on the train, leading to frustrated passengers disembarking at Luton. I hope that these examples of the hundreds of comments that I've received from residents make clear the problem. Too often, Thameslink services are unreliable, late or cancelled. Too often, my constituents are stranded when their stop is cancelled whilst they're sat on a Thameslink train. Too often, taking the train is simply not an option for people in mid-Bedfordshire. It shouldn't be this way. And for commuters in Flitwick and Harlington, the frustration of unreliable services is compounded by the frustrations caused by the failure of Network Rail to deliver step-free access programmes at pace. If we want people to use the train, we must make it easier for them to do so, because for too long, things haven't been getting better. In 2008, a commuter getting the 0741 train from Flitwick could expect to arrive at London St Pancras at 0832. Today's timetable has no more stations, but nearly 20 years later, commuters on the 0741 from Flitwick can expect to arrive at St Pancras 2 minutes later at 0834. And that is when the trains arrive on time, because too often they don't arrive at all. In the past 100 days, 11% of the 0741 services from Flitwick have been cancelled, and 25% have arrived at St Pancras more than 5 minutes late. That compares reasonably favourably with the 0743 service, which has been cancelled 28% of the time and has arrived late 42% of the time. It's simply not good enough. And that's just the morning commute. The best performing return journey between 1700 and 1830 from St Pancras to Flitwick has been more than 5 minutes late, 23% of the time in the past 100 days. For commuters in Harlington, that evening peak period sees 3 services which are more than 5 minutes late, 50% or more of the time. 3 evening services more than 5 minutes late every other time you use them, Mr. Chairman. One of them cancelled more than a quarter of the time. We must do better than this, and I know we can. Because investment through the Thameslink programme under the previous government have seen the travel times from Arlesey to St Pancras drop from 37 minutes in 2008 to 40 minutes now. And services here at least have become much more convenient, with trains now running beyond St Pancras and into South London, and indeed beyond. Of course, even here, there have been problems with delays and cancellations, as the Right Honourable Gentleman from Hitchin knows too well. And the East Coast mainland section of Thameslink will face its own future pressures, and I'll address some of those challenges later on in this speech. Mr. Chairman, the picture I've painted is of an underperforming service which is letting my constituents down. And there are plenty of other statistics I could cite to back that up. Now, this really matters to my constituents who suffer the inconvenience of this service in their daily lives, but it should matter to the government in the big picture sense too. Quick, reliable trains into London help us improve UK productivity, with fewer working hours lost on station platforms and more workers at their desks growing the economy. They also allow for better economic ties between places like mid-Bedfordshire and our capital, and makes it easier for local people to set up and run growing businesses, and that helps deliver on the government's mission for economic growth. A well-performing Thameslink service is vital to supporting the economic growth of the Oxford to Cambridge Growth Corridor, one of this government's central missions. Thameslink services already link London to Cambridge, but they will one day also link London with East-West Rail at Cambridge, Tempsford and Bedford. If we want to maximise the return on investment of that infrastructure project, then its connections into the wider train network need to be fast and reliable. And that takes me nicely into the next section of this speech, because what I'd like to see as an outcome from this debate is a strategy to improve not just Thameslink services we have today, but also one that starts thinking about the Thameslink service we will need for tomorrow. On the Thameslink line, we've already seen the booming success that new onward connections can bring. Farringdon Station, which is served by the Elizabeth line, served just over 4.6 million passengers in 2010. Today, it serves 10 times that number. We know that Thameslink faces significant future pressures. And if those pressures have even a fifth of the impact of that of the Elizabeth line on Farringdon, we'll need to see serious forward planning to ensure that commuters travelling to and from mid-Bedfordshire can benefit from sufficient capacity to enjoy comfortable commutes. Take the Bedford line specifically. In relatively short order, that line could see additional pressure from Luton Airport expansion, a universal theme park at Kempston Hardwick, an interchange with East West Rail, a rail freight interchange in Sundon, and more than 10,000 more houses in my constituency in mid-Bedfordshire alone. I hope that within the next decade, we might see the Ryder Cup come to Luton Hoo, bringing with it huge opportunities, but also considerable pressures on the local transport network. If we're to ensure that comfortable travel on the Bedford line is the norm and not the exception, and I do not think that that is too much to aspire to, then we must start doing the long-term legwork now to put the capacity in place, because the capacity is simply not there at the moment. Overcrowded trains at peak times are now the norm, not the exception. The timetable shows this. If you go on the Thameslink website, you'll see that the vast majority of morning and evening commuter services are filled with the red of standing room only trains. We need more capacity now, so that my constituents don't have to resign themselves to a cramped standing commute every day, but we particularly need more capacity on the Bedford line to cope with the challenges of tomorrow. Do not misunderstand me, Mr. Chairman. I know that work is already being done on this. I met with Thameslink recently and I set out some of the challenges my constituents and I foresee over the coming years. I know from my discussions with the Mayor of Bedford that significant progress is being made on the construction of Wixham Station, which will serve the new town of Wixham in my constituency. But with the government's nationalisation agenda pressing ahead, it will be ministers who will oversee much of the future planning here. And so it is incumbent on ministers to understand the challenges and opportunities facing our communities. Because it is so important that we get this right. It is important for commuters using Flitwick, Harlington and indeed hopefully soon Wixham Station to get into work in the morning. It is important for all of the businesses growing in mid-Bedfordshire who are reliant on a good rail connection to do business in London and across our region. And it is vital for the government's growth agenda. If we want to take advantage of the potential expansion of Luton Airport to grow the economy, we must get people there comfortably and quickly. If we want to get the best bang for taxpayers' buck on East West Rail, we need a Thameslink service reliable enough for people to count on making their connection train at Bedford. If we want to take advantage of the economic game changer that is Universal planned theme park at Kempston Hardwick, we must provide sufficient transport capacity to get people there. And more generally, Mr. Chairman, if we would like to grow the tourism economy in Bedfordshire, as I would, then a Thameslink service that works is simply a vital part of the jigsaw. People will not come and visit our towns and villages, spend money in our shops, and enjoy a pint in our pubs if we make the process of getting here difficult and uncomfortable. Of course, as I said earlier, it is not just the Bedford line which my constituents in mid-Bedfordshire rely on. For many commuters in the eastern part of my constituency, Thameslink services at Arlesey and Hitchin play a crucial role in their daily commutes, and I know that that line is not immune from pressures of its own. Planned housing growth right the way down the line will have a significant impact on capacity pressures over the coming years, as will the line's own interchange with the East West Rail at Tempsford and the potential housing growth that the government might like to put forward there. Significant development at Tempsford would require really concentrated efforts to increase capacity, in particular to avoid services into London becoming standing room only further down the line. Of course, any increase in capacity on this line are made much more challenging by the limitations placed on the services by the Digswell Viaduct and the Welling North Station, where the line bottlenecks and drops from 4 tracks to 2. When ministers take full control over services on this line, they'll need to have a plan for how the network can cope with future development plans being pushed forward elsewhere in government. As I conclude, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to touch on the government's plan for rail nationalisation. Well, I say plan, but at the moment I'm unclear if that is the right word. If I've understood the various announcements made so far on rail correctly, the government will be nationalising Go via Thameslink, but they cannot say when they will do that. There will be a central unified rail system under Great British Railways, except in areas where mayors have requested rail powers under English devolution plans. Great British Railway will be directly accountable to ministers and mayors, but there will also be a new quango, the rail watchdog, presumably to make sure that ministers and mayors are doing their job and improving passenger experience. The watchdog will refer poor performance to a regulator, not ministers. One of the focuses of renationalisation set out in the Labour Party manifesto was affordability, but ministers are now briefing that the savings are minimal and fares are likely to keep going up. My constituents need a clear plan to improve our rail network. So far, it is far from clear how, if at all, the government's renationalisation plans will do that. I look forward to hearing the Minister set out exactly how they plan to make services more reliable, expand capacity, keep fares down, now and in the future. It's what our constituents deserve from the government. Thank you, Mr Chair.
The question is that this House has considered the performance of Thameslink train services. Minister.